The wreck smelled like burned wiring and cold metal. That was normal. What was not normal was the sound coming from inside Cargo Pod 7. Dara Osa heard it first. She stopped walking mid-step, held up a fist, and the rest of her crew stopped behind her. No one spoke. The sound came again, low, thin, like something trying very hard to breathe and not quite managing it. Rook, her co-pilot and the closest thing she had to a best friend, moved up beside her. He had his scanner out. He looked at the reading, then he looked at her, then he looked at the reading again. "Something's alive in there," he said. "I can hear that," Dara said. "Something big. It doesn't sound big. The heat signature is big." She stared at the pod door. It was sealed from the inside, which meant whatever was in there had sealed it, which meant it had hands, or something like hands, or was smart enough to figure out a locking mechanism while dying. None of those options were simple. Her son Yusuf was 17 and not supposed to be on salvage runs into unmarked wrecks. He was also standing directly behind her because she had made the mistake of letting him crew the marginal return during his school break. He was looking at the pod door with an expression she recognized. She had worn that expression herself once, a long time ago, before the universe had taught her to be careful. "Yusuf," she said, "stay back." He did not stay back. She popped the manual seal. The door groaned and swung open on hinges that had warped from heat. The smell that came out was different, organic, sharp, feverish, like a sick animal in a closed room. The creature inside was curled against the far wall of the pod. It was roughly the size of a large dog, maybe bigger, covered in scales that had gone dull and gray at the edges. It had wings, folded tight and trembling against its back. Its forelimb was bent at an angle that made Dara's stomach tighten. Broken, bad break, the kind that had not been set. Its eyes opened. They were amber, bright despite everything. It looked at Dara, and then it looked past her at Yusuf, and it made the sound again, that thin, struggling breath, and did not move. It was not threatening them. It was too weak to threaten anyone, but it also was not afraid, which Dara found strange. She had pulled injured animals from wrecks before. They always panicked. This creature just looked at them like it was waiting to see what kind of people they were. Rook pulled up every database they had access to on the scanner. No match. No species on record looked like this. No registry. No cargo manifest on the wrecked ship had listed a live animal. Whatever this was, it had not been here legally, or it had been here so secretly that no one had bothered to write it down. "We log this and hand it to the Conclave relay at the next stop," Rook said. He said it the way people say things they already know are not going to happen. Dara said nothing. She was looking at the broken limb, at the ribs that showed too clearly under the dull scales, at the way the creature was still watching Yusuf with those amber eyes, steady and patient, like a child who has learned not to hope too hard but has not yet given up entirely. Yusuf crouched down slowly. He did not reach out. He just crouched and waited, and after a moment the creature made a very small sound, not pain, not fear, something else, something quieter. "We are taking her," Yusuf said. Dara looked at him. "You don't know it's a her." "We are taking her," he said again. She almost argued. She ran through the reasons in her head, the regulations, the Conclave's jurisdiction over unclassified species, the risk, the cost of the medical supplies alone. She ran through all of it in about 4 seconds, and then she turned around and walked back toward the ship. "Get a thermal blanket from the emergency locker," she called back, "and tell Rook to plot a course for Redstone, fast." Yusuf exhaled. "What do we call her?" Dara did not slow down. "Ask her when she's feeling better." He thought about it for the rest of the transit home. By the time the marginal return docked at Redstone Station, he had decided. The creature had spent most of the journey unconscious, but once, in the dark between stars, she had stirred and stretched one wing out in her sleep, just slightly, just for a moment, like something trying to reach somewhere, even in a dream. He called her Sora. Dr. Petrosolis did not ask questions when Dara showed up at the medical bay with an unclassified alien in a thermal blanket. She was 70 years old and had been a trauma surgeon for 40 of them. She had seen stranger things, and she had long since decided that the first question in any emergency was never, "What is this?" but "What does it need?" What Sora needed was fluids, warmth, a set bone, and 72 hours of Petra refusing to sleep. She survived all of it. On the third morning, she opened her eyes in the medical bay, looked at Yusuf sitting in the chair beside her, and made a sound that was not quite a word, but was not quite not one either. He smiled at her. Station Chief Adiz Enwasu filed the standard arrival report for the marginal return that week. The cargo manifest listed machine parts, scrap alloy, and recovered electronics. She reviewed it herself. She approved it herself. She did not mention anything else. Neither did anyone else on Redstone. Some decisions a community makes without ever holding a vote. Nobody on Redstone Station agreed on anything. That was simply the nature of the place. 4,000 people crammed onto a spinning rock of a station, all of them opinionated, most of them tired, and nearly all of them, with some reason or another, to distrust anyone who gave orders from far away. They agreed on Sora. Not loudly, not in any official way. It happened the way most important things happen on a working station, quietly, gradually, one small decision at a time. The dockworkers started leaving food scraps near the medical bay window. Petra's nursing assistant, a young man named Deo, began ordering extra protein packs without being asked. The school teacher, a sharp-tongued woman named Lena, showed up one afternoon with a datapad full of language lessons and announced she was leaving it there in case anyone needed it. No one said who the food or the lessons were for. Sora ate everything and learned the language in 6 weeks. Not perfectly at first, she clicked and hummed through human syllables like she was solving a puzzle, but by the time the bone in her forelimb had finished healing, she could hold a conversation. By the time she could walk without pain, she could argue one. The arguing came naturally. Dara's household was full of it. Yusuf argued about cargo routes and fair pay and whether you could call something a meal if it had no vegetables. Dara argued about safety margins and station politics and the right way to pack emergency kits. Faye, Dara's elderly mother, who had come for a 2-week visit and stayed forever, argued about everything else. Sora listened to all of it with enormous amber eyes and a patience that was slightly uncanny. Then she started joining in. Her opinions were usually correct, which was the most alarming thing about them. She grew, not like a human child, faster in some stretches, slower in others, with occasional weeks where she ate double and slept for 16 hours and emerged from it slightly larger, slightly stronger, the scale color at her neck and shoulders shifting from the dull gray of illness to a deep, warm bronze. Her wings grew with the rest of her. She kept them folded inside the station because the corridors were too narrow, but on cargo runs with Yusuf and Dara, she stretched them in the hold and spent hours working the joints, methodical and focused, the way someone trains for something they intend to be ready for. She was 4 years old in equivalent terms when she sat through the night with a dockworker named Oren who was dying of a cardiac event that Petra could slow but not stop. No one had asked her to. Yusuf found her there in the morning, her wing curved loosely over the man's cot, both of them quiet. Oren passed before noon. Sora stayed until the end. She did not explain herself afterward. She just went to Dara's kitchen and helped Faye cook dinner and did not speak much the rest of the day. She was 7 when the atmospheric recycler in Junction Block 4 started failing. It was a cascade problem, 3 components gone at once, parts that would take 8 weeks to ship in from a proper supplier. The station's engineer, a stubborn man named Bryce, who had forgotten more about station mechanics than most people ever learned, had mapped the problem and pronounced it unfixable without the parts. Sora spent 2 days in the junction with a pile of salvage components, a datapad of station schematics she had apparently memorized, and a soldering tool she had borrowed from Yusuf without asking. On the 3rd day she emerged and told Bryce she had fixed it and to please check her work because she thought one junction might run 2 degrees hot. It ran 1 degree hot. Bryce checked the rest. It held for 4 years before it needed the proper parts. He never publicly admitted she had saved the station from a slow CO2 bleed that would have started in 11 days. He did, however, start leaving the junction access codes on the workbench where she could easily find them. She was 9 when she found the encyclopedia entry, an old galactic survey archive that Dara had downloaded years ago for cargo reference. She had been searching for mineral data and found instead, in a back section under species, classified status, extinct, a short entry on the Vaic. She read it 3 times, then she went to find Dara. Dara was in the cargo bay doing inventory. Sora stood in the doorway for a moment, which was unusual because Sora did not usually pause in doorways. Then she said, "It says my kind are extinct." Dara put down her manifest. She looked at Sora. "Does that mean I don't exist?" Sora asked. She was not being dramatic. She was genuinely asking, with the particular directness of someone who has learned that adults sometimes know things they haven't said yet. Dara crossed the bay, sat down on a crate, and looked at her steadily. "You are sitting in my cargo bay," she said, "asking me a question which means you exist. The encyclopedia is wrong. It happens." Sora considered this. "It said my whole species is gone." The encyclopedia also once listed Redstone Station as uninhabitable, Dara said. "We have 4,000 people here who disagree." Sora sat down beside her. After a while she leaned her head against Dara's shoulder. Dara did not make a thing of it. She picked her manifest back up and kept counting. Sora sat there and let herself be ordinary for a little while. At 11, a Conclave survey probe passed through the outer range of the system. The whole station went quiet in a way Sora had never seen before. She noticed the comms team working very hard at something they did not explain. The probe logged nothing unusual and moved on. She did not ask, but she understood. At 14, she stood at the viewport of the marginal return and watched the stars for a long time. Yusuf sat beside her drinking something hot. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I want to know what's out there," she said, then softer, "but I don't want to leave." Yusuf looked at the stars. "You've got time," he said. "Figure out the second part first." She did not answer, but her wing shifted slightly, opened half an inch, and then folded back, the way something moves when it is still deciding. The ship that arrived at Redstone was not a warship. It was administrative, which on some days is worse. It was white and angular, and carried the triple arc seal of the Conclave on its hull in the particular shade of gold that meant this is not a request. It docked at Bay 1 without asking for permission. Bay 1 was reserved for emergencies and visiting dignitaries. The Bay crew opened it without being told to, because when a Conclave vessel docks, you open the bay. That was not a rule anyone had written down for Redstone Station. It was simply the shape of the galaxy, as most people had learned to live in it. Conclave liaison Soren Tal came down the ramp carrying a briefcase and wearing the long grey coat of his office. He was Juvari, tall, pale grey skin, careful eyes. He looked like a man who had delivered difficult news before and had learned to do it without visible discomfort. He had 2 junior officers behind him and a document case under his arm. Station Chief Adiz Enwasu met him at the dock. She offered him tea. He accepted it because refusing hospitality was considered a minor diplomatic insult in 11 galactic cultures, and the Conclave trained its liaisons to know all of them. He did not expect to enjoy it. He did enjoy it. He filed that away for later. "We have received biometric data," he said, "from an anonymous trade contact who passed through this system 14 months ago. The data indicates the presence of a Vaic life sign on this station." "That's an interesting word," Adiz said. "Indicates." "The Conclave is thorough," Tal said. "I'm sure." She sipped her tea. "And what does the Conclave want to do about an indicated life sign?" "The Vaic are a ward species under Conclave protection. As the last known surviving member, she is a Conclave responsibility. We are here to complete the transfer of care." He said it cleanly, without cruelty. He meant it as kindness, which was the most complicated part. He genuinely believed the Conclave was offering something good. Adiz nodded slowly. I'll let you speak with her. He had expected resistance, paperwork battles, angry humans making speeches about sovereignty and rights. He had prepared for all of it. He had not prepared for a station of 4,000 people who simply went quiet. As he walked the corridor from the dock toward the medical wing where the file said the Vaic had last been registered, he noticed people in the halls, not blocking him, not threatening him, just present. Standing in doorways, leaning against walls, watching him walk past with expressions he could not fully read. Not hostile, not afraid, something else. Something that reminded him, uncomfortably, of a wall that has not been built yet, but whose stones are already laid out on the ground. Sora was waiting in the common room off the main corridor. She had chosen the room, he realized later. She had set 2 chairs. She had also made tea, which meant either she had known he was coming or she had heard his ship dock, which was entirely possible given what he knew about Vaic auditory range. She was larger than the file had suggested. 20 years old in equivalent terms, lean and bronze-scaled, her wings folded neatly at her back. She looked at him with amber eyes that were doing the thing eyes do when a person is measuring you without being obvious about it. Liaison Tal, she said, her Duvari was perfect. He had not expected that. You know our language, he said. I know 6, she said. Please sit down. He sat, he put his briefcase on the table. He went through his presentation because it was his job and he was good at it. The Vaic file, the ward species classification, the Conclave's legal authority, the care protocols at Ven Outpost, the documentation. He laid it all out and he did it well. She listened to the entire thing without interrupting. He had worked with species that could not manage that. When he finished, she said, "Can I ask you something?" Of course. In the ward species protocol section 4, I believe, it states that a ward who has reached adult developmental equivalency has the right to speak at their own classification review. Is that correct? He opened his mouth. He closed it. He checked his documents because he was a professional and he did not assume he remembered everything perfectly. He did remember correctly. Section 4, she was right. That is correct, he said. Then I would like to invoke that right, she said. Before any transfer, I would like to speak at my own review. That is, he searched for the right word, highly unusual. Is it legal? He looked at his documents again, not because he had forgotten, because he needed a moment. Yes, he said, it is legal. She nodded. She poured more tea into his cup without asking, which was a Duvari gesture of continued conversation. He did not know if she knew that. He suspected she did. Then I will come to Ven willingly, she said. I have no interest in making this difficult for you. I understand you believe you're doing what's right. I am doing what's right, he said, though he said it a little less firmly than he had planned. We'll see, she said pleasantly. She said her goodbyes that evening. The whole station came to the dock. Not in formation, not organized, just present the way the people of Redstone did everything practically and without ceremony. Dara held her for a long time and did not say anything, because there was too much to say, and Dara had always preferred action to speeches. Yusuf told her she had better come back, and she told him she intended to. Faye, who was very old now and moved slowly, held both of Sora's large hands in her small ones and said something in a language only the two of them spoke, which they had invented together over many years of sitting in the kitchen on long nights. Sora boarded the shuttle. The dock bay doors closed. 4,000 people went back to work. Tal, watching from the shuttle window as Redstone shrank behind them, found that he could not stop thinking about the way that station had looked at him, not with anger. With the calm patience of people who had already decided something and were simply waiting for the rest of the galaxy to catch up. It made him feel, for the first time in a long career, slightly like he was on the wrong side of something. He was not sure yet what to do with that feeling. Ven Outpost had existed for 9,000 years before any human drew their first breath, and it looked like it. Not old in the way broken things look old, not crumbling or worn, but old in the way a mountain looks old, dense with accumulated time. Every corridor was taller than it needed to be because it had been built by 6 different species in succession, each one adding their own ceiling height to whatever came before. The lights ran cool and pale. The air was filtered to a neutral temperature that suited no one species perfectly and therefore offended no one. It smelled like documents. Sora found it fascinating. She also found it deeply uncomfortable in the way that a place can be impressive and wrong at the same time. On her first morning, a researcher named Ven presented her with what he called the 1,000 Doors, a formal conclave term, he explained, for the range of choices available to a ward species individual entering classification review. He said it with pride. He laid out a large illustrated document that showed branching paths, education programs, habitat options, research partnerships, preservation roles. She looked at it for a long time. "These all end in the same place," she said. Ven smiled the way people smile when they think someone doesn't understand something. They seem that way at first, but each path offers distinct. "A comfortable space to be observed," she said. "The colors are different, the rooms are different, the result is the same." The smile stayed on his face a moment longer than it had any right to. The assessments began the next day. Ven ran them. He had assessed 11 other ward species individuals in his career, and he was prepared for a wide range of results. He was not prepared for Sora. Her neural architecture was Vedic. The structure was in the right places, the right configuration, but her cognitive patterns did not fit the Vedic profile they had on file. She processed information in 2 ways simultaneously, flipping between emotional contextual reasoning and structural logical analysis, the way a person switches between 2 languages mid-sentence. Ven had never recorded that before. He ran the test again. He got the same result. Her language scores ended the test sequence because the software had no upper limit programmed. It simply stopped when it ran out of languages to test her in. Her empathic response readings were listed in the assessment notes as equipment error to be recalibrated because the result was outside the measurable range. The equipment was not in error. He did not correct the note. He was not sure why. On the 3rd day, a conclave computing system in the assessment wing crashed mid-session. It was a moderately serious failure, 3 days of compiled biometric data, all of it locked behind an error state that the engineering team said would take 2 days to recover. Sora was sitting at the table when it happened. She looked at the terminal. She reached out and touched the casing once. The system came back online in 11 seconds. All data recovered. The room was very quiet. "How did you do that?" Ven asked. "I'm not sure," she said. "It felt like a tangle. I just found the end of the thread." He wrote in his notes, "Subject demonstrates intuitive system interface capability, origin unknown." He stared at what he had written for a while. Then he added, "Does not appear to be aware of the significance of this." He was wrong about that last part. She was aware. She simply chose not to say so. She had also been finding her way through Ven's secure sections, which was something no one had told her she could do, and several automated systems had apparently decided not to stop her from doing. She moved quietly. She paid attention. She was looking for something specific. She found the archive on the 9th day, the oldest section of Ven, technically sealed for preservation. The door required a senior clearance code. It opened for her anyway. She did not question it. She walked in and spent the rest of the afternoon reading. The Vedic file was longer than the public encyclopedia entry, much longer. The Conclave had been watching the Vedic for 300 years before the end. They had noted the population decline in detail, exact numbers, exact dates, the causes mapped and recorded with careful precision. They had filed 12 internal reports recommending various levels of intervention. None of the recommendations had been approved. Intervention was outside developmental mandate for a species that had not yet reached the formal request stage. By the time the Vedic could have made a formal request, there had been no one left to make one. She read it twice, then she found the human file. It was thin, much thinner than the Vedic file. Humans had never been a conclave priority, too far out, too short-lived, too disorganized by Conclave standards to register as anything worth serious attention. The classification at the bottom had been filed 200 years ago by an assessor whose name she noted carefully. Developmental dead end, file closed. She sat in the archive for a long time after that. The lights in the old section ran warmer than the rest of Ven. Someone had designed it that way once. She found that she appreciated it. She called Yusuf on the long-range comm that evening. The delay was long enough that a conversation felt like sending letters. She told him about the archive. He listened without interrupting, which meant he was taking it seriously. And, he said, when she was done. And I found the door, she said. Which door? The one they forgot was there, she said. The one that was never locked. They just stopped looking at it. A long pause. So what do you do? He asked. I open it, she said, carefully with both hands. She could hear him breathing through the comm delay. Then he said, do you need anything from here? She thought about Dara's kitchen, about Faye's voice, about the sound of the recyclers at night and the particular way the marginal returns smelled like machine oil and old coffee. Not yet, she said, but keep the dock bay warm. The grand chamber of the Conclave Arbiter Council had acoustics designed for authority. Sound moved slowly through it, deep and full, so that every word landed with weight regardless of who was speaking. The 7 arbiters sat at a curved bench of dark stone, elevated enough that everyone below them had to look up. Arbiter Melis Arras sat at the center. She had held that seat for 40 years, and she wore it the way old buildings wear their foundations, quietly, absolutely. She had reviewed the request twice, and found it procedurally valid both times, which was the only reason it was happening at all. A ward species individual invoking their right to speak at their own classification review was an event the Conclave had recorded exactly 4 times in its history. The last time had been 600 years ago. The speaker then had asked for better food at the care facility. Ara expected something similar. Sora stood at the speaker's floor below the bench. She had refused the podium. She stood without it, wings folded, hands at her sides, and she looked up at the 7 arbiters the way someone looks at a map they have already memorized. She did not begin by arguing. She began by laying a document on the presentation table. A projected copy appeared on the chamber's main screen. The arbiters looked at it. Ara looked at it. It was the founding charter of the Conclave. Original script, 12,000 years old. Sora had found the archive copy and had the translation verified by Ven's own records department, which had confirmed its accuracy because Sora had asked them to before she had asked them why. Section 2, Sora said, the purpose of classification is not to contain, it is to prepare. A species that demonstrates readiness for the next stage of growth shall not be held at the stage of the last. Silence in the chamber. This clause has not been cited in formal session in over 2,000 years, she said. I have checked the session logs, but it was never removed from the charter. It is still law. Arbiter Arras spoke carefully. The application of that clause requires demonstration of readiness under current assessment standards. Yes, Sora said, that is the second thing I would like to discuss. She pulled up the human file. She displayed it on the main screen with the same lack of ceremony that she did everything, simply, directly, without performance. The arbiters read the classification, developmental dead end, 200 years old. This assessment was filed by a junior assessor who spent 11 days in the Outer Rim and spoke to no human representatives, Sora said. The metrics used were the standard developmental scale at that time, resource extraction rate, territorial expansion index, and biological longevity score. She paused. Humans scored low on longevity because they die quickly. The assessor interpreted short lifespans as a developmental ceiling. He did not consider what humans do with short lifespans. She brought up new data, not the Conclave's data, her own, compiled from human records, Vaic research fragments, and 3 months of work in Ven's own library that no one had noticed because no one had expected her to be doing research. I used different metrics, she said. Empathy indexed cooperation, the the ability to coordinate with non-related individuals toward goals that do not benefit the individual directly. Cross-species adaptive behavior, successful integration with species of significantly different biology and culture. Intergenerational knowledge transfer under crisis conditions, what a species preserves and passes on when everything is falling apart. She looked up at Aura. On these scales, humans do not score like a dead-end species. They score like a species in early development. The difference between what the original assessor measured and what these metrics measure is the difference between asking how fast something runs and asking where it is going. One of the younger arbiters had leaned forward. Aura had not moved. "These are non-standard metrics," Aura said. "Yes," Sora said, "they are. I would like to ask the Council why they have never been made standard, given that every dead-end classification filed in the last 3,000 years shares the same gap in the assessment data." The chamber was very quiet. Sora's voice did not fill it dramatically. It simply moved through it slowly, with the weight the acoustics were designed to give. "I am not asking the Council to classify humanity as an advanced species," she said. "I am asking the Council to look at a file that was closed before the investigation was finished. I am asking for a review. That is all, a review." Aura said, "And why does a Vaic ward member care about the classification status of humanity?" Sora answered without pausing, "Because humanity raised me, because they found me dying in a cargo pod and they took me home, because a tired salvager named Dara Os sat with me in a cargo bay when I was 9 years old and told me I existed even when a database said I didn't, because an old doctor stayed awake for 3 days to set my bone, because a boy named Yusuf gave me a name before he knew if I would survive to hear it." She kept her voice even. "I am standing in this chamber, alive, speaking 6 languages, citing a 12,000-year-old legal document, because humans did not ask who I belonged to before they decided I mattered." Silence. Tal stood up. He was in the observer section. Standing was not his role. He stood anyway. "I second the request for review," he said. He said it simply, without drama, in the tone of a man who has just put down something he had been carrying a long time. The vote was 4-3. Afterward, Aura found Sora in the corridor outside the chamber. She walked with the measured pace of someone who has nowhere urgently to be and never has. "You understand," Aura said, "that a vote for review is not a resolution. The bureaucracy will take years, decades possibly." "I know," Sora said. "Then what do you believe you have accomplished today?" Sora looked at the tall conclave corridor, at the old stone, at the lights that had run cool and pale for 9,000 years. "The door was never locked," she said. "It just needed someone to open it. What happens after that?" She turned toward the exit, toward the docking wing, toward home. "That's what doors are for." Aura watched her go. She stood in the corridor for a long time after the sound of Sora's footsteps had faded. Then she went back to her office and pulled up the original founding charter on her own screen for the first time in 20 years and read Section 2 again. She read it twice. Yusuf was on the hull of the marginal return, magnetic boots locked to the outer plating, resealing a coolant joint that had been leaking for 3 weeks, when he heard the landing tone from Bay 4. Not Bay 1, Bay 4, which was the bay you used when you didn't want to make a statement. His scanner showed an unregistered shuttle, Conclave make, no military designation. He finished the seal. He took his time. Then he climbed back inside, sealed his helmet off, and walked to Bay 4 with his toolbox still in his hand. She was standing at the bottom of the ramp when he got there, larger than when she had left, somehow, not dramatically, just the small accumulation of growth that happens when someone has been carrying something heavy and their body decided to account for it. Her scales were the deep bronze he remembered. Her wings were folded tight in the station posture she had practiced since she was small. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You're late," he said. "The transit from Ven takes." "You're late," he said again. He was smiling. Sora made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh, and Yusuf crossed the bay and put one arm around her neck in the particular way that was the only hug geometry that worked between a human and a fully grown Vayak. And she let him, and for a moment Bay 4 on Redstone Station was the most important place in the galaxy. Behind her, Tal came down the ramp. He stood at the bottom and looked around the bay with the expression of a man who has prepared himself to feel out of place and has discovered it is actually worse than he expected. The station smelled like machine grease and recycled air, and whatever Lena was cooking 2 corridors over. 3 dock workers walked past, glanced at him, nodded in the way Redstone people nodded at people they hadn't met yet, and kept walking. No one treated him like a representative of galactic authority. He found this both unsettling and deeply restful. Adiz found him 20 minutes later and took him on a tour that he had not asked for. He followed because the alternative was standing alone in a corridor, and Adiz moved through the station the way a current moves through water, steady, inevitable, impossible to politely refuse. She showed him the Junction Block 4 recycler, which Bryce explained had been rebuilt by a 9-year-old with salvage parts and a borrowed soldering tool. She showed him the school, where 14 children were currently arguing about stellar cartography with a level of intensity he found alarming in people that small. She showed him the medical bay, where Petra Solis, very old now and moving slowly, was showing a young nurse how to do something complex with a bioscanner. He watched all of it and did not say much. Dinner was at Dara's, which meant it was at a table too small for the number of people who attended, and everyone managed anyway. Dara was grayer than Sora had remembered. Her hands were slower, but her eyes were the same, sharp, practical, missing nothing, and she held Sora's face in both her hands for a long moment before she sat her down and put food in front of her and said, "Eat something. You look like you've been living on Conclave cafeteria portions." Sora told them everything, not a summary, the real account, beginning to end, the archive and the assessment results and the chamber and the vote. She was honest about what it meant and what it didn't. The review would be slow. The conclave did not move quickly. There would be resistance. A vote for review was not a resolution. Rook, who had been listening quietly in the corner, said, "But the door's open." "The door's open," Sora said. Faye, who was very old now and had been brought to the table in her chair by Yusuf, reached over and patted Sora's hand twice. She didn't say anything. She had never needed to say much. Dara put her fork down and looked at Sora steadily. "And what door was it, the one you opened?" Sora thought about how to say it simply. "The one that says humans are worth paying attention to," she said. Dara was quiet for a moment. "Then, we already knew that." "Now they do too," Sora said. Later after dinner, after Faye had been settled for the night and the dishes were done and Rook had gone home and the station had shifted into its night cycle hum, Sora went to the marginal return. The dock was empty. She climbed into the hold, moved up through the crew passage, and sat down in the spot at the main viewport that she had sat in since she was small enough that Yusuf had to lift her up to reach it. Yusuf found her there. He always did. He brought 2 mugs of something hot and sat down beside her the way he had sat beside her for 20 years, easy and unhurried, like there was nowhere else he was supposed to be. They looked at the stars for a while. "What do you do now?" he asked. She had been thinking about that. The Conclave review would need someone to keep pushing it forward, someone with standing, someone who knew where the old laws were buried, someone who could sit in a cold chamber and speak clearly for people who were not in the room. It would take a long time. It would not be comfortable. "I go back," she said, "as many times as it takes." He nodded. He drank from his mug. "And between trips?" he asked. She looked at the stars. At the particular patch of dark where Redstone's position put them, you could see the outer arm of the galaxy spreading like a slow wave. She had memorized this view so long ago that it felt like part of her. "I come home," she said. She said it the way you say something that has always been true and that you have only just found the right words for. The stars did not change. The recyclers ran their steady hum. Somewhere in the station, a child was laughing at something, the sound carrying through the ventilation the way sound always did on Redstone, thin, warm, impossible to locate, everywhere at once. Sora held her mug in both hands. She did not fly, She did not move. She sat with her family in the ship that had brought her home the first time, and she held the door open. That was enough. That had always been enough.